a real challenge that have all this going on, acquisitions, Indian participation in this, in two Indian companies, at least two Indian companies, actively producing these technologies, and no oversight of any kind, no regulatory framework, evidence of misuse. Because they always claim they do it for lawful purposes, but there's absolutely no way of verifying it. A Congress member, a member of the ruling party, has introduced a private member's bill, and it looks like nobody in the government or in his ruling party, the Congress, is taking any notice of it. We are in touch with this MP, and it's a work in progress. We are very concerned, and earlier people thought this was a concern mainly to Western countries, where there's a great deal of concern over privacy and violation of privacy, but I think it's equally an issue in India. And let's just quickly say that how happy we are to be in this partnership which WikiLeaks has made possible. This is our third project with WikiLeaks. Maybe there's no time to describe the earlier ones, but for us it's been a very valuable experience. Initially it looked completely one-sided. WikiLeaks, we were the recipients, although we did the stories. But now I think this is a new kind of partnership that is being forged, where Julian, I've spoken to Julian on this. You have to be a generous sharer. You do your research, you share your research and insights, and when you do your own stories, even what could be better in journalism of this kind than this experiment? We learn from it, and I think I may look forward to what looks new and exciting. So thank you very much, WikiLeaks, for partnering with us and giving us an opportunity to partner with all the others in this international consortium, which takes up an extremely important issue of great international significance and real significance in India as well. That's what I have to say.
Thank you very much. That's great. I think to continue, if we may, the discussion about emissions, which we discussed briefly a few minutes ago, I'd like to turn it over to Mark Manan to discuss a bit of that.
Hi, my name is Jean-Marc Manan. I'm a French journalist. I'm working at Alpi, and I've been investigating this analysis stuff since this summer. In fact, we discovered that in June that Amadeus, a French company, sold a massive internet, that's their word, massive internet interception system at the scale of a nation to Gaddafi in Libya in 2006. It's forbidden to use it in France, it's forbidden to buy it in France, but have the right to sell it to Libya, because there's no rule in France, there's no rule in Europe, there's no rule all over the world to prevent a company in a democratic country to sell those kind of surveillance technologies to dictatorships. So what I've discovered is that they first sell a cryptographic software to protect the Gaddafi's communication from the Echelon spying system. Then they sold it, they sold to Gaddafi a network stream analyzer, NSR system, to spy on everything that goes on and out of Libya through the internet. And then I discovered the manual, the operator manual of this system. And in the manual, it's written that it can spy on email, it's able to spy on what you look on the web, what you type on Google, what you type on the chat, everything that goes and on the internet, that you receive on the internet, can be spied by the system. And on the manual, it explains that you can graph the relationships of a certain person. And then I go there to show you this graph because it's important.
is a manual, legal manual, and explain how it works, that you can spy on email, Gmail, MSN chat, Yahoo chat, etc. And after, all the examples are redacted. I will show you the page which is important. On page 52, you've got a picture which is redacted. Just click on the image, copy the image.
Hang on a second. So because this is a critical moment. So this company, Amisys, is one of the big spying companies in France, a bit like Siemens in Germany. So this Amisys system was installed in Libya at least by 2009, and this manual that OVNI obtained as part of this research effort includes how to run that system and what its capabilities are. Now, some of you might be aware that with PDFs, sometimes if information is redacted from a PDF, you can uncover it using a cut and paste technique. And so this manual, Jean-Luc was clever enough to see exactly what had been redacted. This was not a publicly released manual even. This was a manual that appears to have been produced for Gaddafi, perhaps in order to sell it to him. And it contains extra hidden information which he will explain.
So you copy the image, then you paste it, and then it's unredacted. And you see the second name, Jeffrey Smell. He's a lawyer. He's the lawyer at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism.
By extraordinary coincidence, we discovered that one of the targets in this manual, the Amisys spying manual from Libya, just happened to be the Bureau's lawyer.
Anacoa. This shows the users of Eagle wanted to know who is Anacoa and who knows Anacoa. Let me introduce you Anacoa. So this manual has been written in the beginning of 2009, at a time when nobody knew the Libyan opposition. Anacoa is Mahmoud al-Nakou, who is the actual Libyan ambassador in London. He lives for the last 32 years in London. You've got also Achalo Gali. Achalo Gali is the one of the 13 founding members of the National Transition Council in Libya, who has been created in February to help Libyans liberate themselves. He is the actual culture minister in Libya. He is in the green list. You've got also Ali Abu Zakouk, who lived in Washington for the last 30 years. And Ashur al-Shamis, who is a Libyan journalist living in London for 20 years. Ashur al-Shamis and Ali Abu Zakouk were financed by the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a NGO, US NGO, financed by the American Congress. They gave them money for the last 4 years to help democracy spread in Libya. So, in the green list, you've also got 2% from the National Endowment for Democracy, 33, 34. So, what I've discovered is that the Amisys system has been used not only to spy on Libyans living inside Libya, but also to spy on Libyans living in London, in the United Kingdom, and in the United States, and to spy on a British lawyer, and to spy on 2 people financed by the US Congress. I think there are 15 Libyans in this green list. 6 were living in England, 2 were living in the United States, and for the 5 people that are living in Libya, 3 has been threatened by the Libyan authorities in 2009 because of the use of the internet. Moussa Koussa, who was the chief of the secret services in Libya, personally threatened one of the Libyans and showed him, you know, this is the list of all the people you are in contact with, stop it, now. Wow, that's it. That's how they use this system.
An important clarification is that these are not individual targets who have individually been spied upon. The Amazon system is a bulk interception system. It sucks down everything, and these people's details are in the maps.
I think thanks very much. I think we'll move on. Our next speaker will be Jacob Applebaum, who's a research scientist at the University of Washington and been long associated with issues of independent computer security. Julie wanted to have a word about him first.
Well, I have to say how much it pleases me to see Jake here today, because Jake once filled in for me at a conference in New York about a year and a half ago. And ever since that point in time, he has been detained on what, 8/10 of the flights that he has made in and out of the United States. So I hope Jake, this doesn't cause you any more grief, or perhaps everyone else on this panel will share the grief.
Thanks. So what I wanted to talk about today is basically summed up in 3 words: reject lawful interception. It can be said just as simply as that. Whenever someone says that they wish to be able to have so-called lawful interception, you should hear that as, I wish the right to be able to spy on you in a way that is completely unaccountable, that is not transparent, and you should trust us and never abuse this. This is something that we must reject, and these systems that are revealed in these documents show exactly the kind of systems that the Stasi wished that they could build. If you remember from the history books, the Stasi letter opening machines. The Stasi letter opening machines were the deep packet inspection machines of the mail service. And this document cache and these surveillance systems are specifically designed to be essentially what you would need if you wanted to have a general warrant, which is generally something that we consider to be a form of tyranny. And these systems have been sold by Western companies largely to places, for example, like Syria, and Libya, and Tunisia, and Egypt. These systems are used to hunt people down and to murder them. There's no question that these systems are used just as weapons are used. And these systems are sold not as you would sell a Nissan truck, but rather they are sold with support contracts. They are sold with training. They are sold in order to ensure ongoing service, including software updates and including individual targeting. This is something that is not actually so different, and in history we have seen this. Edwin Black wrote a book, and it's a fantastic book. I really recommend that everyone reads. It's called IBM and the Holocaust. And this is something that was done by Watson at IBM. Individually knowing about the cases, understanding that he was helping with the genocide for the purposes of profiting from it. We've dealt with this in human history before, and we need to deal with it again. There are people every day that are being murdered based on the intelligence that is gathered by these devices. And make no doubt about it, this kind of spying impacts people not just in the Middle East, but also in the West. As you see, people with relations there. But additionally, these systems are deployed here. And we say, in theory in the West, that it's for lawful purposes. But I know that in my country, the NSA and NARIS and AT&T collaborated in order to spy on all of the American people. So this is not something that's about us versus them. This is about everyone on the planet. And it is about us exporting these technologies, and in addition building these technologies where otherwise they would not actually exist. It was the case in Syria, for example, that before Blue Coat deployed updates, they did not have the ability to detect and to block Tor easily. And afterwards, after an engineer in California figured out how to identify the Tor protocol, they were able to, for a time in certain parts of Syria, to block Tor. This is a force magnifier. In a country where, at least in the United States, that is an embargoed country, where these types of things should not ever arrive. And they know full well that these things are happening, and they do it because profit is more important to them than people and people's lives. And this is something that I firmly, and I believe everyone else here firmly believes, we need to stand against. It took many years for the truth to come out about IBM and the Holocaust and the amount of blood that they had on their hands. We don't have to wait anymore to find that out, and the evidence is here. And we can go after these companies by simply telling the truth about the things that they do and about the harm that they have caused.
Jacob, can I ask you to perhaps you could define a bit and tell people briefly about Tor? Because many people wouldn't be familiar with that.
Sure. I'm here on holiday though, so I say this just from personal use. Tor is an anonymity network that is used So that one may choose to reject lawful intercept while the rest of the world goes mad, if you will. It's a system that allows you to, without any logins or passwords, and without paying at all, freely browse the internet, use different chat services in such a way that if your home internet connection were monitored, for example, with lawful intercept, or even in some cases where someone has broken into computer systems in your ISP, it allows you to anonymously use the internet in a way that those systems cannot easily monitor you anymore. So that when you visit websites or use services online, you have geographic anonymity. That is to say that they don't know where you are in the world. And the people watching you don't know who you're talking to, what you're saying, or where it is that you're going. And this is free for everyone to use. It's free software because freedom requires free software.
Thanks very much, Jerry. Eric King from Privacy International. You're going to talk on the question of using this spy technology and what its implications are for privacy in general.
My name's Eric King. I work at Privacy International, and I run a project called Big Brother Incorporated that for the last year has been tracking the sale of surveillance technology, with a specific focus on the sale of Western surveillance technology to repressive regimes. Because of this, I've been traveling around the world and attending science fairs and intelligence conferences, which I invite only to identify who are the companies and what it is that they're selling and who their customers are. So I thought I'd share with you a few of the stories about the companies, what they've been selling and who they've been selling to. When I started this a year ago, I was concerned that a year later, we wouldn't have got very far. What we're looking at is investigating foreign intelligence services and what they're doing. And so this is an area filled with misinformation. And many people have come forward with false information and sent us down the wrong path. Specifically looking at companies as they're selling this equipment, what we've seen is that rather than selling equipment that is dual use, it could be used for a legitimate commercial purpose, what we have seen is that these companies are building bespoke tools that are being used and tailored for specific regimes. So in many cases, this is building added modules that target specific ethnic groups in regions. Furthermore, rather than selling it from an office in London and never actually traveling to the country, we are seeing European companies actually sending its own engineers to countries like Syria, where they are standing there and assisting Assad in tailoring the systems so that they can continuously monitor any changes in technology that are taking place. When I've spoken to some of the companies who are selling this equipment, I would have expected them to be aware of what they're doing, but they just don't care. They are only concerned about profit. Indeed, in some of the slides, you sort of gain an insight into how they see what they're doing. There's one company that was selling password forensic. And so what this means is that if you have an encrypted folder somewhere on the computer and you're trying to protect it, they sell equipment that allows you to scan the computer, recover the password, so that you can gain entry to that encrypted folder. Their slide to demonstrate this was a photograph of a metal interrogation chair. The idea being that you would beat the guy, get him to tell you your password, and then you go on. And everyone in the room laughs. And this is the kind of attitude that these companies take to these issues. We can speak later on about some more of these stories, but I want to make it very, very clear that these companies know exactly what they're doing. This idea that they've got any kind of deniability, or that just because it was sold by a few resellers is completely wrong. And that what we've got to very carefully do is look at the steps that need to be taken now. Western governments cannot stand idly by while this technology is still being sold. We've spoken to MPs and lords in the UK, and many have expressed support for fixing this issue. Recently, the FCO compiled a report on whether or not British companies had sold equipment that was going to be used for internal repression during the Arab Spring. We in Hague reported that there were no fundamental issues with the export regime as it stood. The The problem is that surveillance equipment wasn't included in this review. Now, why we do not know, but what we have seen is that British companies, including Creativity Software, a British company that sold location monitoring equipment to Iran, sold its technology not just in 2009, but again earlier this year. Governments need to own up. They need to explain what dealings they've had with these companies, and they need to take steps immediately to make sure that these companies no longer continue to sell this equipment.
Thanks very much. We have two more speakers. The next is Stefania Marucci from the Circle.
So good morning, everybody. Hope the slide will be okay. I'm an Italian journalist working for the Italian news magazine Espresso, and I want to tell our work on these files. So when I got these files from Julian from wikileaks, I was very curious about these files because, you know, of course we know that we are under interception. We know that the more we use electronic, the more we use electronic communication, the more we are under interception. But it's one thing to know, it is another thing to go through these documents and see what the companies can really do, what they are capable of. So it was shocking to see what they can actually do. And that is, I think, the most important aspect of this project. I'm sure that many people, many journalists will say, well, we know these things, we know that we are under interception. Yes, we know, but look at these files. Look what they can do, what they can actually do, especially because this industry is totally outside of public scrutiny. So no one knows what they are doing, what kind of relationship they are with the government, what they sell. There's no international agreement on the selling and on the export of these technologies. We discovered that, for example, in the case of Italy, there's not even a software expert on the licensing authorities in charge of authorizing the selling of these technologies. So how can they evaluate whether these technologies are okay or not? There's no possibility. So we work both on the international angle and on the Italian one, because the Italy situation is a special situation. Then I'll let you know what I mean. So the international angle was important because we were able to give our readers a picture, a full picture of this industry. We went through files, some files of the Spanish company Agnicio. Agnicio actually is a Latin word which means recognition. So if you check the files of this company, you can see they tend to represent mobile phone like a puppet. They can fully manipulate your mobile phone. They can send fake messages. They can send. They can change the text of your messages, and they can add calls from fake numbers or real numbers. They can fully manipulate. You can see the picture. They can fully manipulate your mobile phone. You can see these pictures on the file WikiLeaks is releasing today. It is also very disquieting, the German company Elman. We work on this company. If you check the database of WikiLeaks, you can find the Elman catalog. It is a very important document. It is a confidential document, and WikiLeaks revealed these documents for the first time. You can find only on the WikiLeaks website this document. Why it is important? It's important because Elman is a sort of one-stop shop for surveillance. If you go through this catalog, you can see whatever they can do. And they have also technologies for data retention, and they explain how government can use. They can use even to identify political opponents. So it is a very important document, this one. At the same time, you can see in this catalog all the sorts of technologies for surveillance, even the techniques to do undercover drilling for putting hidden microphone, hidden microphone on walls. Then we work on the, yes, I have problems with my microphone better now. So we work on the Italian angle. We work on the Italian angle because I think we are in a very difficult situation in Italy. Italy is a sort of Wild West for interception. Wild West, what I mean with this statement, is a sort of Wild West because we are half country in the hands of mafia. It is not an exaggeration, it's true, unfortunately. We have colleagues who live under protection. We at L'Espresso have a colleague, he's a young journalist, he's only 38, but he's prominent. He's often quoted in the WikiLeaks cable as one of the major experts on mafia. So he is still alive only thanks to local interception, because the police was able to learn in advance that there was a bomb under his car. They were ready for killing him. So he's grateful to local interception. On the one hand, we find this in this situation. We need the local interception with check and balances. In Italy, you cannot have a local interception if you don't have a magistrate asking for interception and another judge, an independent judge, say yes or not to the magistrate. And we have to be grateful for discovering all the scandals, all the political scandals, from the sex scandals of Berlusconi to the scandals about Vatican, thanks to local interception. At the same time, we have some of the worst Western scandals on interception. We have our most important telecom targeting journalists, for example. We have mafia and fascist gang penetrating one of the most important cybersecurity companies. And it is ironic that they were discovered thanks to local interception. They were caught thanks to local interception. So, at the same time, we found ourselves in a difficult situation because we have these scandals, but we have mafia. So how can we live with this situation, with this difficult situation? It's very difficult. Going through these files, we discovered that the same companies, the very same companies managing the local interception business are managing the intelligence interception business, where you have no check and balances, you have no public scrutiny, you have nothing. So it was very important to have the evidence.
Thank you very much, Stefan. That's great. And our last speaker, and not by no means the least, is Stephen Murdoch, who comes from Cambridge University and is an expert on privacy and anonymous communication.
Yes. So my areas of research are on the technology behind privacy, both how technology can be abused to violate people's privacy and how technology can be used to preserve people's privacy. How surveillance is frequently presented to the public is targeted monitoring of individuals where there's strong suspicion of wrongdoing and some sort of judicial oversight to prevent abuses. But what these files show is that surveillance is increasingly wholesale monitoring of entire populations, but there's no suspicion of wrongdoing. Everyone's communications are being harvested and stored in the hope that they might sometimes, some other time, be useful. The potential for abuse of these technologies and this data is huge. What we've seen in Libya is only the tip of the iceberg. Without controls on this industry, the threat that surveillance poses to freedom of expression, civil society, democracy, and human rights in general is only going to increase.
Thanks very much. I think we're now in a position where we can take some questions. And I'd actually ask people to make questions and not make too many statements. Straight ahead. Go ahead.
Question for Mr. Assange, please.
Good.
Mr. Assange, a question about Amesis. Would you say that the French, what can you tell us about this implication of the French government in what Amesis has done in Libya?
Amesis's operations are large, and we know that it is publicly known that the Sarkozy government was aware of a number of those operations, including their involvement in Libya. So there is actually an interesting question as to what was the French government's purpose. Did it encourage Amesis to install the system in Libya? And was it, if you like, a backdoor into spying on the Libyan people and the Libyan government itself? But best place to answer that question is
we know that the French government, Nicolas Sarkozy, asked Claude Léon to make deals with Gaddafi. We don't know if he knew that Amesis sold this spying software. We don't know exactly who knew that this spying software has been given to the Libyan government, sold to the Libyan government. But we knew that the secret services were aware of this. But Amesis has the right to sell the software to Gaddafi. That's not the problem. We need to change the law. It's not normal at the moment to sell those kind of surveillance weapons to regimes like in Libya that can kill people with the use of this democratic country software.
Okay. Back there.
I think it sounds like a fantastic investigation, but I'm slightly sort of confused. Practically, it seems that Eric spent a year gathering large materials and doing some brilliant stuff, but I'm confused about what WikiLeaks' actual involvement in this was. What was your involvement at the start of WikiLeaks? That's the first question. And then the second question is there any connection between this material and material given to the Wall Street Journal? They did a series of articles about this about 2 weeks ago. Same stuff?
the involvement of WikiLeaks was investigating this area in general. And so Eric and Privacy International acquired some documents, we acquired some documents, Albany acquired various documents, I think the Bureau might have even acquired some. So we pulled together this group as a sort of a mass attack on this mass surveillance industry. And so that's our involvement. In relation to the Wall Street Journal, there was conversations and dealings with the Wall Street Journal. The heavily redacted material they released is only related to one conference in Washington, ISSJ 2011.
Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I'm wondering if any of your investigations, individual or together, have uncovered any actual evidence of harm or death, as you say, to any individuals from the surveillance?
I think I would speak generally unless someone has a specific case, because I've been operating at a sort of satellite level first. We know that these governments use mass surveillance in order to understand who are political, military, or criminal threats. And so, and the companies, such as Element in Germany, in their sales literature, their confidential sales literature, describe their mass surveillance software as being useful for discovering and monitoring political opponents. That is the phrase that is used, political opponents. But in relation to particular deaths, it's quite hard to draw these together. I understand the Bureau has interviewed someone who was called into Gaddafi's intelligence chief in relation to surveillance. Jake, do you have some concrete examples from the Middle East?
I have a few concrete examples, and without naming names of the specifics, because I'm sure that I would get them wrong, I can say that in Syria, in Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt, there are individual cases where this has happened. In the case of Tunisia, it is without question that people, almost all people in that country, were monitored by smart filter devices, and that there were political opponents, as they were called then, before the revolution succeeded. And those people were hunted down as a result, in addition to their things being blocked when they tried to access them. In the case of Syria, I recently returned actually from Tunisia, where I was at the Arab Bloggers meeting earlier this year. And I met people there who told me that things as simple as posting on Facebook would actually result in death squads coming to people's houses. And people were very afraid to talk about specific names, but with hundreds of people being killed each day, and with those things being attributed directly to the surveillance state, I feel like it is absolutely safe to say this. And also in Syria, there is the case of some journalists who have made very grave mistakes. And in fact, if you're a journalist, you're probably making that mistake now. And it's maybe an error to say this, but the communication security of journalists is very serious. Because when they do investigations in a country such as Syria, when their Facebook account, for example, is compromised, which did recently happen, I believe, to a very prominent journalist in Syria, their contacts and who they worked with became compromised. And that resulted in people having to leave Syria as well. And as I said, I feel that these things are quite serious, and taking that communication security seriously as a journalist is something that will help to quell those problems.
Sure. I mean, surveillance takes many forms, and a lot of these agencies, like the intelligence agency in Syria, have been doing this for a long time. This is one of their tools. Tonight, if you watch Newsnight, we'll give examples, in fact, of people in Syria that have been tracked. There's no definitive way to say they've only been tracked by a particular software, by a particular company, but it's generally a suite of tools that are offered. There have been examples, actually, a number of news outlets. Bloomberg has actually done a whole series. Wall Street Journal has also done pieces on specific individuals who have been shown their emails that could have only been traced using this kind of software. Remember, I mean, this is a way to track any individual and actually to go back into the past also. So if, for example, there's a company in South Africa called Vastec, and what they do is offer the ability to store the entire data traffic, phone calls of a country. So 2 years from now, the information that's held in their repository can be used to trace somebody back in the past. But again, it is one tool, and it's hard to say that one company is really responsible for a specific death. It is a whole system that security forces use.
Identify yourself, please.
Yeah, my name's Jeremy Kirk. I'm a reporter with IDG News Service. I have a question for Julian or anyone related with WikiLeaks. You described that there should be a new whistleblowing platform. You haven't taken submissions for a long time, at least via the web. Can you sort of describe what form that's going to take? And are you taking submissions?
So we are working on a next generation system, and I've been doing so for some time. And it is threats like this that have to be dealt with to deal with national security sources. You know, here we have spoken about mass telephone surveillance, mass email surveillance, mass chat surveillance. Companies like Vastec boast in their confidential literature to intelligence agencies of storing the entire telecommunications output of the entire country and keeping it. So you can go back in history at any time you want to discover someone. So this isn't a case like it used to be of individuals being the subject of intelligence activity. This is the case of entire populations being the subject of intelligence activity. And that includes any journalistic sources. Another issue that has occurred recently, which Jacob and Eric know something about, is the problems with the SSL system. Right now, no banking transaction on the internet can be considered secure. That is simply a fact because of the compromise of SSL certificate authorities by intelligence agencies and crime groups. And the same issues affect us when we receive information from sources. So we've had to develop a system which involves offline components as well as online components.
Do you have any online submission system? Is that going to be effective? Or,
Me personally, I think it would be helpful to reveal what sort of phone they use before indeed they use one at all. For the general population, I think it's simply too hard. That's the unfortunate reality, that even security experts have problems dealing with the level of surveillance that is currently automatic. Intercepted at border gateways automatically for entire population groups. So I think the way that we're going to win this war is actually not through legislation, although that is needed to stop harm in the worst countries, but it is through cryptography. We have to provide counter-surveillance technology that is open and easy for everyone to use, and is the only way that we are going to stop a global totalitarian surveillance state. I mean, it sounds absurd for me to use those words, but that is the practical reality for people, that we are in a totalitarian surveillance state, i.e. that there is total surveillance.
John, back to you.
Guy Rundle from the Sunday Age in Melbourne. Given the low level of technical competence displayed by your media partners in the cable net release, can people acting as sources to the mainstream media have any confidence in guarantees of confidentiality? And secondly, does the failure of governments to crack down on this sort of total surveillance technology export, has it or will it put British troops at risk?
I think perhaps Pratat, you would be best placed to answer the British troops.
Sorry, she was...
Well, yes, it puts British troops at risk.
You went follow it. I actually wasn't following, so I was just checking to make sure our website was up. I know you were from the Sunday Age in the 9th.
This is Guy Rundle from Crikey. There was quite a good article appeared in the New York Times by Chris, one of the experts who's not here, that is in the United States, who worked on this investigative project with us, that says just that yes, the current threat by the surveillance industry, the mass surveillance industry, is such that really no national security journalism can be done unless it is in closeted whispers between people that happen, for other reasons, to come into personal contact. That's an unfortunate fact. We have developed a lot of expertise in countering surveillance in relation to our own sources, and this event is an example of the result of that expertise. But I see the situation as very grim for investigative journalism, not just on the national security sector, but on any company or interest that is connected to the national security sector.
Sorry, I was not paying attention. But, the question was about whether or not this puts British troops at risk. Well, actually, it puts any troops at risk. I traveled a lot in Iraq and Afghanistan, and soldiers, just like myself or anybody else, use cell phones there. You can buy a local SIM card. I was in Baghdad airport. You can buy a SIM card and put it in your phone and use it. So any American soldier or British soldier, unless they, even if they turn off their phone, they can be tracked by somebody using this technology. They use Skype. I mean, every soldier, if you go to a base anywhere in Iraq or Afghanistan, you will see soldiers using Skype to talk to their loved ones back home. And that can be intercepted using sophisticated technology, or actually not that sophisticated technology. Eric and Jake probably be better placed to explain how IMSI catches work. But literally, you can take a 10-pound phone and transform it into a tracking device where you can follow people. So unless they ban these soldiers from using phones and Skype, they will be at risk. Everybody is potentially at risk from this technology, but maybe Jake or Eric can explain more about how the technology works.
I mean, you can pretty much ask yourself a question, which is, am I carrying a mobile phone? And if you are answering that with a yes, you can actually just replace that question with, am I carrying a tracking device that also happens to make phone calls? And the answer to that is actually also yes. turns out. Because that's what GSM is. GSM, the cell phone technology with SIM cards that is used all around the world, it is a tracking network that also happens to make phone calls. And as it happens, while there may be some kinds of very bad security, it is the case that the telephone systems themselves are designed architecturally to support the politics of surveillance. It is possible to have end-to-end encrypted calls, such as the cryptophone, and in this possibility, we see that it isn't the case that this happens by default, which means that we have, as our architecture, one where it is not end-to-end encrypted, where it is simply possible to record everything that everyone is doing, not just location data, but voice data, SMS data, right? MMS data, when you get a picture. When anything comes to your telephone, the telephone companies, the towers in between, and towers run by people that are neither the telephone company nor anybody that should be intercepting your communications, those will also fall prey to spying by design.
I've also spoken to a number of British journalists, and I've been incredibly surprised by the number of British papers that use Gmail for their sole email provider. In fact, I don't believe there's a British paper that doesn't. The two sort of attack vectors on that are both legally and technically. The documents that WikiLeaks are publishing today show that on every single interception tool that is being deployed now can break Gmail HTTPS. And they do that in a number of ways, and if you look through the documents, it will explain in many cases there are slideshow presentations saying, proven before breaking Gmail, proven before breaking Yahoo. And the other one is, of course, all of this data is held in the States with Google. And Google has to abide by the rules in which they're residing. And if the NSA or anybody else legally demand that they hand over the data, Google can fight, but faced with an insurmountable challenge, they will legally have to hand over your data. And so I ask journalists that are using Gmail to think very carefully in the future about whether or not they're comfortable protecting their sources using the system.
This is for Julian. I work for Times Now, the Indian news channel. We saw that you're coordinating with the Hindu newspaper in India. Firstly, what is WikiLeaks' input towards helping Hindus' investigation? And secondly, what can you tell us something about the investigation at all?
I don't think I could remove the Hindu scoop tomorrow. But the Hindu was a partner like all these other partners were. We pooled resources, pooled our findings from the investigation. We kicked it off with a large case of files and videos from these intelligence contractors. And we all pulled together, and today is the result. But you also see just now the Washington Post articles come out from the US angle, and the news will come out sometime tomorrow.
Back there?
Yeah, James Edgar from the Press Association. Is there any concern that in revealing the details and the contact details of people who are under surveillance, you're actually going to be putting them under more danger by revealing their identity?
So I take it you're referring to this list that we saw from Amazon.
Yeah, for example, those email addresses could be sensitive information to those that you want them to be.
This list is, I think, the only list of people that have been spied that are released today. All of those people have been contacted. They know what happened, and it lasts for. It was 2 years ago, so it's not a privacy risk to say that the actual Libyan ambassador in London has been spied by a French company. It's fact, and I won't shut up because it would be a privacy violation. It's information. It's not in more privacy.
I think we can all agree that the privacy violation has occurred already.
And it's not the content of their emails. It's only that we show. Well, we built a website whose name is spyfiles.org without me that shows all the countries that sell this kind of surveillance technologies, and the kind of surveillance technologies is sell. At the moment, we know that Amasis area, which is a Netherlands company who sold monitoring systems to Syria, we know that Cosmos, another French company, is actually operating in Syria. We know some companies that Elaman tried to sell some stuff to Egypt. The spring, the Arab Spring, is a great thing to expose those dealers of surveillance weapons, because we begin to have proof that some Western company sold those systems to those countries. So I think it's only the beginning of a long saga where in months we'll have more stories, more companies that will be exposed as doing bad stuff. It's only a beginning. We have, I think, proof for 10 companies at the moment.
And I'm sorry, if I can very quick. So the problem is that we don't have data because this industry is totally outside the public scrutiny. This is the problem. This is the problem. Even with companies which say, well, we have high moral standards, there's no way to check because we have to rely on what they say, and there's no control, no public control whatsoever. So how can you be sure that it's true? I mean,
yeah, my point, if I may just, are you accusing these companies of acting unlawfully or not? Because yourself, you say, your colleague has saved his life because of lawful use of this technology. So what are you exactly accusing?
yes, the problem is that even with lawful interception, for example in Italy, which we need lawful interception, as I mentioned, there are huge problems because, for example, there's no law at all for data about lawful interception. So we have the black market in Italy, and a big scandal about the black market of local interception sold outside. We have even companies selling Trojans to private individuals. Thanks to this project, we discovered that an individual, a powerful one, in close contact with the high echelon of the Vatican and the oil industry, bought this project, and we discovered, we were able to go through the forensic analysis and discovered that the Trojan was not created by a rogue expert. It was sold by a company. So this company don't sell only to governments and to law enforcement agencies. They sold even to private individuals. So you can buy only for 200,000, maybe 300,000 euros these technologies and spy on powerful individuals, on whoever. That is a Wild West. And I think this project is important for this reason. Put under the light these companies, this industry, and make an argument. We need rules, we need agreement, we need public scrutiny.
Oh, hold on a second. We have an interesting slide here that may be very helpful. Can we get it up?
The problem is that those companies have the right to sell those systems to bad guys. That's not the problem. We need to change the laws.
So some of the data has, some of the proof about selling to dictatorships has come about as a result of the Arab Spring. And that's really quite extraordinary. For example, when Gawa, the Egyptian secret police, was looted by protesters, information about German companies came out, and similarly in Libya. And that's where we have the concrete details, other than this good work by Omni in revealing the email intercepts that are in the Amasis manual. So we shouldn't go, well, look, this is just about Libya, or this is just about Egypt. No, in all probability, this is about every country in the world. It's just that there haven't been too many spy agencies that have had their internal archives pumped out by the population previously. This graph here is the big game. I call this the new great game, as opposed to the imperial games that were in Afghanistan 200 years ago. So here we have a map of worldwide cables. 95% of telecommunications traffic is carried on undersea cables. These landing points are interception points, although they can be also intercepted on the sea floor. They're in the WikiLeaks release. There are documents that describe devices that are sold devices that are sold specifically to intercept cable landing points. And that means interception en masse. If we look at the geopolitical reality, zoom out a bit. If we look at the geopolitical reality is that nearly all telecommunications traffic coming from Latin America passes through the United States, where it can and is intercepted. Similarly, telecommunications traffic from the United States and from Latin America, if it is speaking to the rest of the world, passes predominantly through the United Kingdom. Telecommunications traffic from Asia and Australia passes across the Pacific Ocean to the United States in order to get to Latin America or to Europe or to Central Asia. In the Middle East and Africa, there are very few telecommunications pipelines to connect that part of the world to the rest of the world. They can be intercepted in Ethiopia and in India. So that is the informational geopolitical reality of the world. The ability to permanently record billions of hours of telephone calls. They say the entire voice telecommunications take for a country are playing this game.
Tim Klaus from Süddeutsche Zeitung from Germany. I was actually wondering if you have found any evidence in the data that also the European companies who produce this kind of software are also spying or selling it to governments within Europe who are then spying on their own population. That's the first question. And the second question related to that is how much of the material that's going to be released on your website now is actually really new? Because some of those things have already been written about, for example, the involvement with the German company that was involved in the spying in Egypt, for example. Some of those aspects have already been found, so how much is actual really genuine?
The overwhelming majority of the material is new.
Okay. Can you number that? Like 50?
We released 287 documents today and releasing more as the week progresses. In relation to European companies, the big trick here is like the phrase Department of Defense. When we all know what is meant is often Department of Offense. So the big trick in this industry is the phrase lawful interception. So that prefixes almost everything. But you will see in some of the material we've released a split between what is described on the one hand as lawful interception and what is described on the other hand as strategic interception. For example, in one of the element documents, you see lawful interception, you have the total access to telecommunications, but you gradually filter it out down to the targets you're interested in. In strategic interception, you take the total telecommunications tape and you record the total telecommunications tape. You do not filter out for subjects of interest. And this within the industry is the split between the concepts of lawful interception and strategic interception. Many of these companies have a front company or a front in public face where they talk about quite openly that they are involved in lawful interception. But in fact, they are also involved in what they describe as strategic interception. But that is not publicly revealed. Companies like Vastec in South Africa have simply one web page, literally a single page, even though you have a large company underneath producing this sort of scale.
In terms of equipment being sold within Europe, tracking who is selling what is incredibly difficult. But what we have seen is that the British government hosts events where British companies who are selling surveillance equipment get together with local law enforcement and sell the detailed technical documentation. If you're selling it to low-level law enforcement, you're going to be wanting to put on splashy graphics, going step by step in detail what you're doing. And many of these companies' target markets are low-level law enforcement.
I wanted to actually answer your question about is there an accusation of criminal behavior? I think it's really important to understand that some of these tools, they're what we would call tactical exploitation tools. That is to say that they break into people's computers. Generally, these computers are located in houses, in workplaces, on your person. That's what a smartphone is, right? It's a computer. These devices break into it in the way that we would normally say it is illegal for other people to do this. So they sell tools that would be straight up illegal for other people to use. And they additionally, while selling these tools, often talk about how they don't have legal controls. And at ISS World in Washington, D.C., which I attended this year, there were sometimes breakout sessions where people discussed how you could get around, for example, needing a warrant to collect data, because data retention was often considered, it's not personal until you have their name attached to it, so we can give you ID numbers or cell towers or all those cell phones that were associated with the tower. And some of these tools, for example, for installing remote listening software on these phones, the phone company has to be complicit in it. And so that, to me, smacks of completely breaking tons of laws as a business model when it comes to tactical exploitation. So every time you see tactical exploitation, targeted surveillance, you can say to yourself, if this was someone on the street doing it, they would be arrested and spend a long time in jail. So in that regard, especially with regard to regulations missing in certain countries, you can probably say that the computer crime laws would otherwise apply to these people. And so I think, yes, there's the answer to that. And from a large-scale perspective, when you wiretap people, at least in the country in which I'm from, the United States, it is certainly the case that wiretapping on a large scale without a warrant, without targeting people, is something that we have for a very long time considered to be illegal. It's part of the reason that we reject general warrants, in fact, is part of the American spirit. And while we haven't always done a good job of keeping that spirit up, it is certainly the case that large-scale wiretapping is and should be considered a crime. And doing it should not be tolerated. And if you were to do it, it would not be tolerated, and there would be absolutely no mercy for you. So these tools are specifically designed to do things for a specific class of people with asymmetry, and that asymmetry is serious. So this document release hopes to answer the question of who watches the watchers, and the answer is we do, the 99%.
But I'm afraid we have to give it a break. We're due out of the hall now. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much. There are some rooms in which breakouts will occur, in which people can speak. It's B103, B103, and C115. Those are the two breakout rooms that we have. That'll be for the next 40 minutes or so.